Welcome to session 3D. Session 3D is going to be a really interesting session. It's going to be presented by Gavin Littlejohn. The title is Global Open Finance. Global Open Finance. And the focus of that talk is going to be around data-driven initiatives to help governments, companies, and the individual to make better economic and financial decisions. So Gavin Littlejohn is the person that will be talking through this topic for us. I'll just give you a little bit about his bio as we're waiting for him to connect. I think right now he is in Scotland. I'm
here, Derek. I'm with you.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that, Gavin. Gavin has a long background in promoting these kinds of issues, and I don't want to take too much time out of the presentation time. There'll be time at the end for further comments from me and from those who are in the audience. But in essence, Gavin's been in the fintech kind of entrepreneurship line for his whole career, pioneering technologies such as software as a service, distributed computing, and open finance. And he's the founder of Money Dashboard, and he served as CEO until 2015. He also advises several financial service firms on strategy and occasionally teaches innovation techniques. So Gavin, great to have you with us. And let me hand the reins to you.
So Derek, I'm going to have a go at sharing my slides. Let me know if they come up okay.
Okay.
How did that go?
Yes, it's there. That's very good. You might want to just go into slideshow mode as well. There you go.
Does that work?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me at such a prestigious event. I look forward to sharing a few thoughts and ideas. I'm going to divide my presentation really into two parts. The first is going to be describing the journey into the creation of something new and the sort of market drivers for it. And the second is going to be trying to articulate the solutions we've identified to fit those market requirements. So I, in addition to my background as being a tech or fintech entrepreneur, have led the trade association, which is particularly focused in the open banking and open finance domain. For those of you based in the US, you'll have noted that the president issued an executive order a week ago on Friday, one of which led to the thought of bringing in new regulation for open finance as part of the requirement to update Dodd-Frank 1033 for the CFPB. So we were heavily involved in things like that. We've been involved in open banking, open finance in other markets. So the background to this, we've got a portfolio of FDATA chapters. We started in Europe in 2013 when we negotiated data access into the second Payment Services Directive, which required every bank in Europe to be required to share financial data when the customer provides consent with a regulated third-party provider. And we've been operating in the North American market since 2017 and Australia and New Zealand in 2019, and have continued to expand in Asia and South America. We've not yet arrived with a market presence in Africa, but we're currently working on that. So that's what we do. We effectively try to present structures, inform, share best practice, and try to get this market opportunity moving to the betterment of end customers. So we're a members organization. We've got a number of firms whose logos many of you will be aware of in the data aggregation, credit reference agency, cloud accountancy, bank, fintech, consumer-facing fintech, and so forth. And the model basically is that those organizations participate with us, and we represent their ideas and thoughts into government and regulatory authorities and the negotiations with the large financial institutions. And just the background to this, I guess I'm going to spend maybe 50 minutes on this particular slide, just going through it quickly, section by section. So the first point to think about in this is, from the healthy elements of an open finance ecosystem, what does it mean to have a customer data right? So the first thing is that the end customer, be they a consumer or a business, has the right to share data that pertains to them with a regulated actor of their choosing. The idea being that they can share data which enables competition where there's information asymmetry between their incumbent provider and a potential competitor. So very simply, we've seen ideas similar to the customer data right evolving at different speeds and from different market contexts in all corners of the globe. But the fundamental building block is this customer right. If the customer has a right to determine data that pertains to them and how it can be used, then there's a number of things that flow from that. One of the first things you have to identify, moving on to the second point, is the data types and scope. So what does it mean to have data that pertains to me? Well, if I'm the data subject, for example, under GDPR or LGPD in Brazil, or the new Data Protection Act in India, I would have the right to move data that were fact-based about me, not the right to share data that's another party's intellectual property. So for example, I could share data about my transactional history from my bank account or credit card, but I would not have the right to share the method through which that particular bank or credit card provider scored me for a particular product, which is their intellectual property. So what we say here is that the provider of any intellectual property has the right to use it and to monetize it, but where the data is simply fact-based, we're arguing that the customer should have the right to use the data in a way that meets their needs. And then that brings with it a right to deal. What we mean by that is, if you're a regulated actor and you've been accredited in the market, another party shouldn't be able to stop you from accessing the data, unless, of course, there's very good grounds and a regulated actor has been proven to be underpinning fraudulent transactions. Then, of course, there would be some secondary right to remove that party. But principally, what we're meaning by right to deal is that the parties can get in the market, and as long as they've got the accreditation, that they're in on a fair and equitable basis. Reciprocity means that both the data recipient and the data donor, act in both roles. So it's not just the flow of data from big banks to small fintechs, or from fintechs to big banks, or from big tech to big banks. What we're saying here is that if there's a fundamental customer data right, they should have the opportunity to port it to where they can get most value. And they should do that using explicit consent, which could be given and taken away. And that where the data is misused, in other words, it's not the consent that they've given the data to be used for has been used for something else, or if the data has been mishandled or hacked, or they've suffered some grievance as a result of it, they should have a fair opportunity to have some method of getting customer redress, and that should be underpinned by a very clear liability model which makes the customer whole when things go wrong. If you're going to make the customer whole and you're perhaps a company with a thin balance sheet, like many fintechs are, you want to make sure that there's adequate cyber insurance in place, and that when there is a claim made, that there's a simple and easy method for the customer to get the compensation. So that is something that a lot of markets are looking at the moment. It's quite complex, and it requires us to think about really intricate things in a plural business model. What I mean by that is, normally when you have a problem with a provider, you know who the provider is, you go to them and you hold them to account for making you whole. And if they don't do that, then there are places that you can go to say, well, you know, either through the court or through some form of regulatory intervention to create some process through which you get compensation for that nefarious activity. The problem is, in an open finance, open banking model, open life model, depending on where you take it, it could be that you've shared the same data to multiple parties, and actually having to design a system that is able to take account of all of that complexity, where it could be the same data, it could be a slow bleed hack, and it might not be certain to the party who has been guilty of the data loss that it was them. So you need to start thinking through things like how you're going to handle forensic audit of the security systems, and trying to find a method of looking at traceability. It also requires a number of other elements, which I'll come on to in the second section on delivery, around trust and identity systems. So the final thing, I guess, in the policy section is that once you've worked up all of these components that make for good policy in a healthy system that is competitive and supports innovation and looks after customers when things go wrong, you need to try and build that into some legal and regulatory framework. What we've learned watching different markets have a go at this is where that legal and regulatory framework is deeply prescriptive, where it's in the written detail precisely what needs to be done, the rapid evolution of technology and innovation very quickly leaves the written word behind. So where we've seen it work better is where the authorities articulate the outcomes they're seeking, which is obviously, as we've described, to safely enable innovation and competition, but not try to be too prescriptive, and then require the market, and this is a really important part of the legal and regulatory framework, they're requiring the market to work together through some governance and funded structure to build the capability that is required to support the customer's needs. And that requirement and that force to be able to make this happen, and that compulsion for everybody to participate, appears to lead to a better market ecosystem. There's a whole range of other methods that have been tried, and they all have their merit, but other models other than the one I've articulated in policy on the left have tended to leave either the customer or a market participant hung out to dry in particular scenarios, and if it's properly thought through, that doesn't have to happen. We would also see that highly prescriptive technical standards work very well, where these prescriptive technical standards are set by the market and are set so that they can consistently evolve with the changing attack and threat model, and that the APIs aren't, if it's an API technology, for example, that they're not standing still. We've noticed as well that common user experience design patterns help. What I mean by that is if you're going to go to one provider to kind of set up the content to share data, let's say from your loan, and you go to share your investment or your pension, and it's a completely different style of customer journey, and it's a completely different journey even amongst providers within the same financial vertical, then it can become quite complicated for the customer to learn how to follow the method of sharing. And then, you know, in order to get those things to work well, you need to have some orchestration element, some central entity that's working with industry to set the standards and to make sure that those standards are monitored, and you know that there's some method of enabling that to take place. And you know, ideally, if that's delivered through fair and proportionate funding, then because we've already got on the left-hand side customer data right, the right to deal and reciprocity, it stands to reason that if there's that compulsion to participate, then all parties pay into that central orchestration and governance, and the unit cost per participant is manageable. The central system can also play a pivotal role in managing the trust framework, managing the connection between the identity between the regulated actors, so that you've effectively got that you can't enable a nefarious actor into the system to make a connection on an API, and that there's some lookup table. And if you did that extremely well, which nobody's done quite yet, you would then follow that all the way out, you know, the last mile out to the customer, and have the companies and the customers within a comprehensive identity and security framework. So that's the target. We've not got there, but there's a lot to work on. And then, of course, performance and conformance enforcement, building this ecosystem and then having a party in the ecosystem let the side down by building a poor quality implementation means that there's a skew in the competition and innovation opportunity. So if a company chose to build a very good pipe going out of a very good pipe coming into their business to get other people's data, but an inefficient and ineffective pipe going out of their business, they could effectively create some kind of skew. So it's against that background of trying to understand how to go through the implementation of open finance that we started to look at some of the issues that led us to think that there might be a need to build a centre of excellence. So when we went live in the UK, having been building up to it for several years with an API-led central system, we revealed some pretty serious market issues. One of the big issues was that the banking sector had been unable to reasonably recreate in production, unable to recreate in test the security apparatus that they had in production. And as a result of that, all of the companies who'd been operating with them in their test models, when they moved into production, recognized that they had to start again. And in effect, we ended up having to manage the rollout with very, very small numbers of customers whilst we bedded it in, where the law could have allowed us as third-party providers to load up millions of customers in a system that was completely untested. So we didn't really have a sense of anybody owning these problems. We also had huge issues with things like market categorization. There was still information asymmetry in the ability to build algorithmically driven financial models for stochastic forecasting and investment, or for affordability and lending, or for any other form of marketing or product manufacture that required data to train models. They were completely missing from the ecosystem from an availability perspective. And you know, it became abundantly clear across all the different issues that we faced, from security, fraud, from innovation, from technical standards, the central ingredient to solving all of them was, in fact, we needed to learn to collaborate. It was an industry, and if there's one takeaway point from this, that as we change from these linear business models into these much more complex open market architectures, that you have to learn to collaborate, and even with your competitors. So I'm going to move on now to just switch lanes into describing why, as a trade association, as FDATA, we felt that we wanted to get behind the idea of creating a centre of excellence to begin tackling these issues. So we've got this interim name, and I understand the name is going to change in a few weeks, and you can see why. It's a bit of a mouthful, the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence, but it was named because it does what it says on the tin, and the idea was to look at this domain and build capacity. So I'm going to start at the top right-hand corner and just kind of a very quick run through, and then I'm going to go through it section by section. So we've got a technical standards group here that's looking at alignment and interoperability across the global ecosystem for how money and financial information moves around between countries and between companies. We've got an innovation environment which enables companies to access the tooling they need, data assets, and so forth, to allow them to get to really fast product market fit. We've got a global economic observatory, which is ingesting data assets from a whole variety of sectors to provide information on how consumers and businesses are interacting with the economy. We've got an economic crime research unit looking at fraud typologies, particularly in the new ecosystem, and also money mule and money laundering capability where there's a lack of collaboration hindering effective policing and interception of criminal funds. We've got a customer data protection research unit looking at all the systems of liability, redress, insurance, and so forth. We'll come on to talk about that a bit more. And then, there's a question here of also trying to find pathways to create training and talent capability out of that. So one of the things that we needed was access to supercomputing facilities and real data science specialism. And we were reasonably lucky that the University of Edinburgh agreed to host it and invest in it as a kind of what I would describe as a temporary measure, pending the spinning of GOFCoE into a new legal entity, which would then be put into diverse, internationally governed, not-for-profit ecosystem, able to interact and support all markets. So I'm now going to go in and drill into each of these sections, but yeah, you can see across the top, not-for-profit, politically and commercially neutral, diverse governance, and those are the kind of key ingredients to help build trust, which is essential for GOFCoE to perform its role. So we're going to start in the technical standards arena. So as we've evolved the open finance, open banking ecosystem, lots of markets have looked at it and have had a go. We've seen lots of individual entities begin the process of building their own commercial APIs, which is fair enough. And then as the policy and governance and regulatory authorities have caught up with the changing ecosystem, we've seen that many of those private initiatives have had to begin to grow into align with a broader regional ecosystem. So for example, in the UK, we've got 4 different groups that are looking at one element of the open finance ecosystem. We've got open banking, pensions dashboard, payments, and also we've got others looking at savings and investments. In the US, we've got, for example, the Financial Data Exchange looking at a whole range of different types of financial services from a standardization perspective. We've got the same in Australia, we've got the same in India, we've got the same in China, Japan, and it became pretty clear that as these markets were evolving, if we didn't get a conversation going between the different providers, we would struggle to get any form of interoperability. Why is it important? Well, an API technology requires both the data donor and the data recipient to engineer. If every data donor builds something different and lots of data recipients are trying to connect, there are simply not enough engineers in the world to support it. It becomes too complex, and it becomes that way very, very quickly. In the previous version of Open Finance, which was based on screen scraping, it only required the data recipient to build the technology, and the data donor was not involved in it. Now that we move to API, it changes everything and it gets complicated. So when I speak to governments, I try to usually explain that API technology is a bit like electricity, and it needs a common set of plugs, sockets, and voltages to make it work. The plugs and sockets are a bit like the a bit like the registration and identity layer. The security profile is a little bit like the voltage. And then behind it, you've got the appliances, which are a bit like the applications that you connect to an open finance ecosystem. It could be a refrigerator or a television, and we're never going to get to a position where we standardize internationally at that level, because products are manufactured differently. They've got different fields of data. So we think we've got a reasonably good shot at getting to proper alignment on the plugs and sockets and voltage element. And to, the idea here is that will effectively reduce the engineering costs and improve security, and allow companies to focus on the value added service of building things that face the customer. So as all of these different countries have emerged with these different technical standards, we've tried to bring these groups together, and we managed to do that on the 10th of March when we brought representation from six continents. We had all the large economies present, all of the G7, G8, most of the G20, and a range of others besides, including some countries who are represented here, talking about interoperable thoughts on security in the financial sector, who may from time to time be on a geopolitical level at odds with each other. And we've been discussing, how we manage that situation. We agreed the first point was to create a digital library of all of the world's open API standards, and then from that we'd be able to look at looking at the using independent academic assessment, looking at side-by-side comparison of the different written standards against the attack and threat model, and then provide a service to write the mathematical proofs, and try to get into a position where, without compelling any of the parties to align with any particular standard, by working together in the working group and solving emerging threats, it would build trust, and through time we would see some glide path to that standardization agenda. And all of the countries have agreed that that's the right approach. Nobody wants to turn up at work one day and be told that you're going to have to stop doing all the work you've done and switch to somebody else's standard. But everybody was quite prepared to enter into a working group arrangement where they may at some point in the future arrive at the same place. So the second meeting of that is tomorrow. The participation in that continues to grow, with interesting new countries coming to it from Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East, and we will continue to try and be inclusive and support that agenda as much as possible. So onto the Customer Data Protection Research Unit. We talked a little bit in the policy section at the start about the different types of activity, but what we're thinking of here is harms of sharing data with a legal actor. So it's not, we've got an economic crime research unit, which I guess is kind of a twin, looking at what happens when a bad actor, a nefarious actor like a criminal gang gets hold of your information. But this is actually looking at potential harms of dealing with a proper business that has unfortunately made a mistake. So one of the kind of core building blocks of that is looking at how your data is used in financial services, how it's kept safe, and in fact, looking at things like exploration of data ethics and how we would interact with the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence across financial services. We're also looking at digital ID and how that becomes a really important part in financial inclusion. We've started to investigate what happens across different markets, and we can clearly see that some patterns have emerged where some countries have really nailed it and have got a very effective system that improves financial access whilst also helping to manage different types of financial crime, and other countries where due to perhaps concerns about privacy and government invasiveness, their ability to deal with digital ID has been restricted. And these things are quite, there's no one size fits all, but it's definitely, an issue that that all markets are looking at, and providing some sort of independent research appeared to be a good way to kind of build a library of information to help countries exploring this have a place to go to find out how other folk do it. The Customer Data Protection Research Unit is also building an algorithmic bias and discrimination test lab. The idea here being a bit like taking your car in for an annual checkup, that anytime you have a significant deployment in your model, you'll be able to just run it in for a test, and the test will provide a level of assurance that you can hold up to regulatory scrutiny and to your company directors and shareholders, and from a social responsibility perspective, show that you've taken steps to try and treat your customers fairly. We've also got war games scenario testing for data breach and ransom attacks. We've got the first one of these due to start in a few weeks. The plan here is that we've got an independent aggregator, data aggregation service, for example, like a Yodlee or Plaid or Finicity or MX or somebody of that ilk, who's been subject to a breach, and where there is there's a number of connecting customer-facing fintechs, and then we're trying to work through the scenario of who does what the regulators say, what the law enforcement people say, what the financial ombudsman does, and whether the cyber insurance companies that have been heavily invested in actually pay out. And we think that until we've been through that scenario testing and actually brought everybody into the same room to go through how it would be handled theoretically, that everybody is just guessing how other people would perform the role. So we hope that actually creates a capability that we can share and help people think through these issues. And then in that group, we're also developing a library of privacy law and financial regulation. We can clearly see that different markets are handling some of these things in different ways, and being able to interact with the war games testing, but also look at different scenarios and different approaches in different markets will provide some capability. And we've got testing of different liability and redress frameworks. We've got a lot of work thinking about, at the moment, we've got a team looking and interviewing market participants to see whether the type of cyber insurance that we're looking for was really available. We're producing surveys, and we're interviewing the insurance companies themselves At the moment, the market in insurance terms is pretty hard, and companies have been experiencing really high premiums, and there needs to be some work to remodel, perhaps looking at things like introducing a market cap. In some countries, there is a market cap. In other countries, there's no certainty as to what you would get paid out in the event of some issue relating to your data. So we'll be trying to use this and build capability and feed that into policy, feed that into regulation, lawmaking, and try to kind of build capacity behind the industry to help guide how it develops. Economic crime research unit still at its early stages, but given the fact that the centre is hosted in the same environment as a national supercomputing facility, we're contemplating and have worked with regulatory authorities in the UK, in the US, in India, in the European Union, in various markets, trying to think about how we might be more collaborative in dealing with money laundering in particular. The challenge, of course, as many people listening to this will know, is that when frauds occur or criminally sourced money enters the mainstream financial ecosystem, it doesn't stand still very long. Nobody appears to launder money within one bank, because that's how they get caught. They quickly move it between banks and between countries. So without effective collaboration between banks and between countries that's using a more data-driven approach, we're obviously going to always come off second best. And the criminally intended and the terrorists have always got the advantage of lack of cooperation on the other side, which isn't helping anybody other than them. So I'm going to move on and just go into the Economic Observatory. So one of the things that we wanted to try to do was to develop this archive, this center of scientific and historical, something that's able to look at behavior of how humankind earns, spends, and saves through the lens of both consumers and businesses. And we've been building capability in that already. We've started to ingest pseudonymized data sets at real scale. We're talking here about millions of records, updated on a weekly or monthly feed, depending on whether it's consumer or business data, and supplied by the banks, fintechs, accounting platforms, credit reference agencies, and other financial institutions. The data is coming in into this highly secure area in financial data safe haven that's effectively looking after a whole variety of other types of data, health data, and other highly sensitive personal data. So there's some pedigree there in handling that type of data at scale. And then we're basically going to build that out. One of the key things, just going down to the bottom of this slide at the moment, the research projects to date have only taken in UK data. At the start of the pandemic, I reached out to regulators and treasuries across the globe and tried to kind of figure out what the appetite is to work together on assessing the changing nature of solvency, business performance, and risk during the pandemic. And we were told by many of the large markets, if we were able to show that we could get it going in the UK, that we would potentially be able to look at some kind of hub and spoke model where the data gets processed locally, but then shared into some kind of central environment, so that academics in all corners of the world, people that are representing charities, people that are representing policymakers, actually have a evidence base with which to develop policy decisions. It became very clear during the pandemic that governments were throwing money at things without really much insight as to what was actually going on in the economy, particularly trying to find sources of finance to small businesses. We saw that evolve all across the globe. Our FDATA membership were some of the primary supporters of government initiatives to distribute funds. We knew how difficult it was, and we knew that there was a substantial amount of guessing. So by actually having these up-to-date data insights, so to give you a UK example, if you wanted to query at the moment what women between the ages of 55 and 60 with a household income of under £30,000 when they went into furlough had kept up with their credit payments during the pandemic, you could just key it into the system and it would give you an answer. So from that perspective, highly versatile research is what we're looking to develop. In the long run, that will also help companies think about product market fit. For example, looking at things like polarization between homeowners and renters, or how people save for long life, or the impact of expensive credit on young people. So these are kind of big, important issues of the day, and we need to sort of provide research capability to underpin it. The demand is significant. Getting the data is tough, and for every research institution, for every university to go ahead and try to do that independently just doesn't make much sense. What everybody wants as a university researcher, an economist, or somebody looking at climate change, or the intersection between health and wealth, what you want is the research data to go ahead and build your model and to provide evidence. You don't want to have to be going out speaking to lots of financial institutions in the kind of heavy lifting of trying to get data assets centralized to enable it. There's obviously a lot of things that are important here around risk, liability, privacy enhancing technologies, which are quite key to this as well. So we'll come on to maybe talk about that in the Q&A. And then, my kind of finishing point here, because I'm not going to go into too much more detail on the rest of the kind of scope in GOFCoE, but the innovation environment really, for me, was where it all began. I was a fintech entrepreneur. I was one of the pioneers of open finance in Europe, beginning in 2005 with Money Dashboard. And when we set out, there just wasn't data we needed to train anything. Obviously, the development of data science was in a totally different place, but getting access to data to begin to tackle it was just impossible. So we've started to look at how to address innovation and make that innovation scalable and to really accelerate. It's clear that modern financial distribution is increasingly using data science, for want of a better word, to develop capability across the manufacturing, marketing, and the distribution elements of it. So, and then even before you get to manufacturing, how do you do market sizing? How do you know whether companies you're serving or consumers that you're serving also fit the profile of other companies or consumers that you wish to serve? So there's a whole raft of different gaps that are in the realm of not having access to financial data across different financial verticals. And increasingly, we're seeing trends where there's more of holistic or whole of life financial planning that require the provider to be able to access the liability and the asset and the insurance elements of the customer's financial stuff. And being able to build those capabilities requires access to information. So we built the idea of an innovation environment in GOFCoE, and we've got a team of people now who are investing in it very heavily and working with the the companies who've already begun the process of supplying data to the Global Economic Observatory for research to inquire whether we can change the data sharing agreement to enable us within the secure area, highly secure area of the financial data safe haven to build high fidelity synthetic data doubles in a synthetic data factory. And using a GAN, a generative adversarial network, to effectively fire from the synthesized data along with the real data at the adversarial node, and through that train the doubles to get better and better so that they maintain all of the qualities of the real data, except they're fully privacy enhanced. And even though the original data was pseudonymized, we didn't want to rely on the pseudonymization to protect the privacy of the underpinning party. So we're taking pseudonymized data as the base data. The beauty of this model is that, given that the synthetic data production still, many view it as still being relatively early stage in data science, actually having the base data there to continually go back and check it against, is something which we think is a highly valuable thing to use as our building blocks, and have huge scale data and enable companies to build these models and get to product market fit faster. The idea here is that the companies come in a bit like the International Space Station. They come and they dock, they load on the things they need. They've got access to machine learning workbenches, API environments. The library, I mentioned before, the library of API standards from the technical standards will be contributed to the environment. The algorithmic bias test lab will be contributed into the innovation environment. So companies will be able to tool up with everything they need to build and internationalize and scale very quickly. And hopefully that helps to foster innovation and competition to the betterment of the end customer. We're talking about facilitating the companies that are coming out of these data-rich environments to then partner with the companies who are providing access to that data. There's no point in learning to use data in test if you then can't use it in production. And there's also a raft of venture capital, private equity, corporate venturing opportunities for companies to really get involved with this and to build out capability and to get faster to market with the capital they need to succeed. So Derek, that's opportunity now for questions. If anybody wants to find out more about the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence, they can contact me at gavin.littlejohn@fdata.global, and I'll do my best to plumb them into the ecosystem. I'm going to roll off GOFCoE towards the end of the year, or at least scale back my involvement to go back to FDATA. My role in GOFCoE as the Chief Innovation and Research Officer has been to set up these 5 market-facing propositions: the Economic Observatory, the Innovation Environment, the Technical Standards Working Group, the Economic Crime Research Unit, and the Customer Data Protection Research Unit. I'd be happy to take questions on any of that.
Excellent. Thanks for that coverage of the history behind where this all came from, Gavin. Fascinating to kind of hear about the journey and how it's really started with a lot of your experiences in the UK, but then expanding out into other parts of the globe. Interesting to hear comments regarding recent moves in the United States. From I guess it was 2 weeks ago or so, the president made some changes and opened some doors for more of a spotlight, more of an emphasis on the whole idea of open finance. What was interesting to me as we've been talking about this now, you and I connected probably, I guess, 6 months ago, or maybe a bit more, was just following the progress that you've made in different parts of the globe, and some of the challenges regarding the different cultures. You know, those cultures, you know, as we all know, you know, strategy is great, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. and so we know we want to try and do a bunch of things. We've got great technology, great ideas, you know, excellent groundswell of interest taking place, but you know, how to actually make sure that we navigate through the turbulent waters of the sort of the undercurrent of culture is a huge undertaking, especially when you start thinking global. I mean, it's, you know, culture within a company is an interesting, you know, discussion, and can completely, you know, create so many barriers that many large corporate initiatives have faltered. So I know that, you know, you've touched on a lot of the cultural, you know, issues and some of the need to change. And you know, to paraphrase something you said a bit earlier, you said, if this is going to work, a range of ecosystem participants must learn to work collaboratively. So maybe if we can talk a little bit more about that, the learning to work collaboratively. How can people listening to this, and how can, you know, individuals around the globe step up to that challenge?
Well, I think that the first thing to do is to be sensitive to the other party, and try to put yourself in their shoes and see yourself as they see you, and try to work out what it is that their problems are, and make sure that you always reflect to the party that you're looking to collaborate with, that you're really listening to them, not just, you know, broadcasting to them, but really going in and trying to listen to the problem, and then trying to see if there's bits of their problem that are similar to bits of your problem. Mm-hmm. And from there, if you've identified a mutual need that can be then enabled by talking and by learning how to solve it, then, you know, I think that's probably the first point. And maybe the second is to make sure that you clearly articulate, you know, as well as you may, upfront your values. Mm-hmm. So the center that we've been working on is doing some reasonably important things, but it's not trying to be a controller, it's trying to be a facilitator. It's trying to give industry and government and academia and charity and all the different sectors that connect with it, the bits of the puzzle that they need to succeed. Recognizing that, you know, for example, the economist or the researcher in an academic institution can't provide information on, you know, major affairs facing the world if they don't have access to good data. You know, there's no reason why, for example, if you're looking at something like climate change, you know, everything has some correlation with money. Yeah. And if you're measuring the money at source, you get fast, accurate information, you know, to the nearest penny or cent. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to learn to understand what that money's been used for example, you could look at the spending on energy, or you could look at, you know, a whole variety of different things, depending on not just the data, but also how you link interesting data sets. I don't know quite how this will work yet, but data research, to the best of my understanding, which isn't as good as some of the listeners will have, but you either start with an idea of the problem you're trying to solve, and you try and find the data that you think will reveal the answer, or you put interesting data sets together and you let the tools explore it and try and find patterns that you maybe didn't know were there. Well, if we combine in the Economic Observatory both public data, so information that's available to everybody, like prevailing interest rates or unemployment rates or registers of births, marriages, and deaths, or property registries, anything of that ilk, and then combine that with private information, with bank transactional information that's got some understanding of the age and gender and zip code of the party, without revealing the level of detail to identify them. You can start to get a really rich mosaic covering health, education, climate. Money seems to touch a whole bunch of stuff, and by enabling it for research, it really does facilitate it. It's the gift that keeps giving.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point, is that, once you get started, everything's kind of connects after that, and people start, it becomes almost an avalanche, but the key is to get started and to get that initial buy-in, and I think what you said there is so important, and that is really to try and talk about common interests, between the parties. These are my interests, these are your interests. Oh, look, there's some really interesting common interests, and maybe we could kind of experiment a bit, try and do some prototyping and see what comes out of this, and kind of gently move into it. So yeah, it's definitely a situation where you need a lot of wisdom in dealing with people, and a lot of really open, authentic communication about common interests up front. It's certainly not something that you can walk into, a room cold and with a bat start bashing people over the heads with, because it's, you're going to get shown the door very, very quickly. It can't be just a pure technology play either. There's definitely the human factor is strong in the approach, and building those relationships with people and so on, is a huge part of getting started. But as I said, I mean, even in the short time that I've known you, observing the momentum that you guys have already created is impressive. I must tell you, it's impressive, and it's exciting. So with that, I just wanted to again thank you very much for sharing that with us. It's been fascinating. Look forward to continued input from you into this forum. And not just next year's, but in between now and next year's symposium. Looking forward to involvement from you guys, and wish you best of luck with everything that you're undertaking.
Thank you, Derek. We'll be looking for partnerships in financial services, in academia, other universities that are wanting to participate, in government, in regulatory authorities, in charities, in law enforcement. So there's a whole variety of different types of stakeholder that we're looking to engage, and hopefully maybe there's in listening to this, it maybe triggers an idea in one of the listeners about reaching out to connect. Yes,
absolutely. Well, thanks again, and thanks to our viewers. And I know this is recorded as well, so it's not only our viewers today, but viewers on into the rest of this month and next year, probably. people will be signing on and listening to this. So again, thanks very much. And we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back. So get back to your agendas, have a look and see what's out there, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.